Hi Gemini, welcome to a tarot reading for the end of December 2019. It's an update. It's Raina here, and just laying out the cards. Okay, so you have several major arcana cards here, and you know, this is perfect that I'm doing this reading today because this is a full moon in Gemini. So there you go. How are you feeling, Gemini? And it's funny because the full moon is like an ending, and here I have a card of endings. So perfect. Oops, my cord will not stay put, and it's going to go out if I don't do this. Let's see. So the death card is the central theme here, and it's letting go of something as the year ends. You know, somebody wrote to me about a 2020 reading that I did for your sign, and they said, this sounds kind of gloomy. And I don't really think, you know, I don't really remember what cards I laid out, but to me it didn't seem like that at all. And I think that sometimes people want all the sparkly, shiny things in life, and I think the death card is really a cool card because it really talks about, you know, the past being dead. And even like if you have been dealing with the death of somebody, that can be a very emotional time, but it can be a very meaningful time. I mean, I'm just thinking about in my own life. I really feel like the death of somebody important heightens life, makes it more than what it normally is, and that kind of a mundane, you know, we're just going through the motions, where it just kind of reminds us that life, that this world is temporary. So if you're suffering, to understand that that suffering is temporary, even within one life. You know, we have problems and then they go away and we forget about them. You know, if you've ever kept a diary and you read your past diaries and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot, I was really like upset then. And then, you know, we go on to the next thing. So this too shall pass. And these transitions, which is what the death card really is about, it's not just about physical death, but I mean, you know, transitions in your life. This is kind of, to me, heralding a very important year for you, and even 2021 as well, Gemini, because you're gonna start having eclipses in your sign. Your first eclipse won't occur for almost a year, until November, at the end of November 2020. But Sagittarius, which is your opposite sign, and so it forms a, you know, the opposition to you is going to be in June. So that's your, you know, when there's a lunar eclipse in your opposite sign, the sun is in your sign. So it's happening. There's always that kind of a connection there. So 2020, 2021 can be very months of, or years of great change for you. So looking at this full moon, since I'm recording it now on the actual date of it, and embracing the endings and not being afraid of them, but kind of ushering them in, welcoming them, you know, kind of using the rest of December to clean up those loose ends that maybe are existing in your life, and you know, really looking at things from the desire to embrace change and new beginnings is, to me, the best way of handling it. Oh yeah, I didn't think about this. Oh, this is right on time. I was thinking astrologically. I was saying, okay, where is the solar eclipse in Capricorn in Gemini's chart? Well, that would be the 8th house. Hello, this is the house of death. This is the house of Scorpio. The death card is connected to Scorpio. The 8th house is Scorpio, and one of the themes of the 8th house is death, but it's really, again, transformation, transition, transformation. So you're having a solar eclipse here, and of course that's a general, thing. Not all Gemini sun or rising will have this in that particular house, but to make it simpler, I say that, and that can be kind of having new beginnings with this very intense sector that deals with the mysteries of life, which, it's funny, it's not really that funny that death is in this house of the mysteries of life, because that's one of the biggest mysteries, like what happens to us after we leave this world. And because I have the sun there, it's that sun in Sag in the 8th house, that's always been, as an adult, my obsession. Those kinds of deep issues. And for some of you, this is a springboard, this solar eclipse, into that area. In the past position, we have the Queen of Wands. This can be the confident career woman. So how do we kind of reconcile this with the death card? Well, something may have happened. Some of you may have lost your job. Not necessarily due to incompetence, but just maybe restructuring of the company, whatever. And the point is that if that was your identity, you have to ask yourself, who am I again? Maybe you had this job title. Maybe you were a manager and you actually had people under you. And that can be a blow to the self-esteem and to the sense of self. But it's very important because it indicates a need to look beyond your worldly status. And the same thing happens when somebody retires. Maybe some of you are in, you have that you get fed egoically by having this job, but you really want to retire. And yet you think to yourself, well, what would I do? Who would I be if I didn't have this? And that can be, kind of distressing. Whenever I read about famous people that have, that retire, like somebody like Oprah, retiring from her show, even though she really did, she still has things. But, I always think, that takes a lot of guts, because those kinds of people, they've really been so long associated with that, to just kind of go off into the, the wild unknown. And I'm not talking about, you could say, oh, poor baby, she's got $1 billion or something. But I'm talking about there's something else that feeds people. It's not just, the money, how much they're making. It's really that sense of their place in the world, which is what, in astrology, the 10th house of career is that place. And we feel that sense of like, this is who I am. And that's why we have to check in with ourselves a lot, because that can lead to not understanding the true nature of thinking that, you are what you do. And you are what your job title is. And so the death of that can be very, important to get you into the, more detachment from the world and the kind of traps that we find ourselves in. Because really, when you think about it, it's really about service. It's not about glory, as much. The Queen of Wands can also be somebody who comes in, maybe a new manager, and she's like a dragon lady. Even though this is in the upright position, I could see that, because I had a similar thing like this for another sign. I can't remember which sign. And it could be like, uh-oh, this is like a diva, and I don't think, this is all over but the shouting. Like, you can't, that you're not going to be able to work with this person, because you might think that they're too overbearing. The higher message is the king. The higher message is the Knight of Swords, and you are swords, Gemini, because of being air sign. And the Knight of Swords is kind of like, tells it like it is, more blunt and stuff like that. But all Geminis are not going to be like that. You have Mercury in Cancer. You may be very careful about your speech, and you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And, a lot of times a Gemini will say things without thinking, but some Geminis are more careful and sensitive, where if you have a moon sign and water, and you're just very plugged into how other people may react, and you have sympathy for other people, you don't necessarily run your mouth like that. So it could be saying that you're contributing to this situation because you're kind of like biting your tongue. If somebody is kind of walking all over you and it's not fair, or they're demanding of you things that they shouldn't, then if you're willing to quit, then why not speak up? I'm not saying that if you're like not willing to speak up because you don't want to lose your job, that's a totally different situation. But if you're like thinking to yourself, I'm going to quit, I can't do this anymore, and that's what the Death card means to you, then, why not give it your all? I mean, and I don't mean just like ranting at somebody, but just saying, pointing out to them that how they're treating you is not helping you, and things like that. What crosses you is the High Priestess, and this can mean that you're not tuning into your higher self, your intuition. You're kind of maybe reacting to whatever is going on in a more I almost said Aquarius. With Gemini, it's more of approaching it from a standpoint of being overly analytical instead of really feeling what you're feeling, being overly analytical, and as a result, this can lead to being out of touch with your feelings. And I do connect the feelings to the intuition. I think that the problem is that sometimes there are conditioned responses that are not really intuition, but they're more like reptilian, habitual responses, where it's like a very primitive response that you always tend to give because these are the unconscious motivations. Once you become conscious of why you are the way that you are and some of these patterns, you can be more mindful of how to handle them. But, kind of bypassing the intellect and just tuning into the spiritual side of things can be very helpful. And, part of this is like if you're in the workplace and that something has changed, you're not enjoying what you do as much. Maybe before you're very gung-ho, you're very enthusiastic, and now you're kind of feeling a sense of resistance. Being mindful of that, being aware of those feelings is so helpful because it can mean that you are able to make new decisions and let go of the past and not, let it linger. Because otherwise you may try to hold on to something that's already dead. And that's the thing. And this could even be like a relationship. And although for some reason, I'm focusing more on work-related matters. The other thing too is that there may be something going on behind the scenes that you're not aware of, and this is working against you. And I'm also saying this because the advice is the Page of Swords, which is about being vigilant. In some cases, if there is actual violations in the workplace, it might even be taking notes, or, they call it, what do they call it? Like when you kind of, this has been kind of a brain fart day. Document the things that are going on against you or what have you. That can help your case if you feel like you have to do something legally. But it can simply be if you feel that maybe the death card is that you see the writing is on the wall with something in the workplace. Like maybe other people have been let go and this new person has come in and they're just kind of, or other people have even quit because of the changing situation. And you're just kind of wanting to gather information. This is kind of like the spy card. And being vigilant in general, because there may be things going on behind the scenes, and then you can determine what's the best way to handle this. The outcome is the Temperance card. So again, whenever I say the 1 foot in the water, 1 foot on land, the spiritual and the material, and that the Death card is really about understanding that all things, it's like that song by George Harrison, All Things Must Pass Away. And, that was the name of his album. And it's so true. All things, even if you have a situation that is wonderful, everything's great, eventually it could deteriorate. And some people, they just say, yeah, but it was so good for so long. And they kind of resist the transition into something else because they can't really, they're so focused on the good old days. And the Temperance card is saying, yes, those days were great, but it's unfulfilling spiritually because I don't feel that sense of joy anymore. I might feel like trepidation, anxiety about going in to work every day, and I have to focus on my current feelings. The High Priestess, when you kind of analyze away your feelings, you can talk yourself out of things, and that isn't necessarily good because eventually these things will probably come to a head. That's just the nature of life. And because you are having these eclipses, and the North Node goes into your sign in May, I believe it is, or is it? Yeah, I think it's May. You're going to have to, this can be a very important time for you, but it's also because it's tied to the eclipses. Even if you resist change, it's still going to be there, like it or not. Now, Gemini is a sign that usually embraces change, like I said, but we are complicated beings, and this is borne out in astrological charts. If you have inner planets in Taurus, you may be much more resistant to change simply by having the sun in Gemini. May not be, and especially if it's close to Taurus too, if you have a late degree, if you have an early degree Gemini, you may be more Taurian in a lot of ways, and have inner planets in Taurus. Mercury, Venus, Mars, your moon sign, if it's in a sign that likes continuity, then you may feel a little bit unnerved going into this eclipse season with your sign and Sagittarius, your opposite sign, because you feel like, wait, hold up, I want to be able to control my environment, and it's time, it's time for change. And the very best thing you can do is say, universe, I'm ready. And just surrender yourself to whatever happens. And really, in terms of the death card, I think the death card, one of the greatest, possible interpretations of the death card might be surrender. Because you're letting go, you're saying not my will, but thy will. Talking about God or the universe or what have you. And just, being willing to accept whatever comes down the pike. Okay, Gemini, that is what I have for you. If you would like an astrological reading, natal chart interpretation, or transits reading for 2020, I have that one listed because it's a new version of it for especially for 2020. But I've got all kinds of astrological readings. You can check me out at rainandmoonastrology.com. The link for one of my readings is below. Take care. Bye.